Item 4, which is safety of children on city-owned properties and at city-sponsored events. Commissioner Buzzi, do you want to tee this up?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to keep it brief, considering the time. Most of you know that several months ago that, well, actually, I brought this up in another workshop, that it came to my attention several months ago, back in June, concerning our library unattended children policy. And it caused me some concern, at least initially, even more so, the fact that our library guidelines allow for unattended children as young as 8 years old to be completely left at the library without an adult anywhere on site, a parent anywhere on site. And it just seemed to strike me as 8 years old is awfully young to have a child completely unattended without any caretaker anywhere on the premises. And my understanding is it was particularly the time of the year is during the summer that this becomes a particular issue, when we have potentially dozens of children that are either dropped off or walk on their own volition to the library. My understanding is the library does have a nice program set up where they do provide lunch or provide drinks and food and things like that for the children. And you know, I want everyone to understand that I'm not anti-library. I'm not trying to take away a safe zone for kids. To the contrary, I just want to make sure that if we're undertaking to provide a safe place for children, that we truly are providing a safe place for children that will pass muster, both legally and ethically, morally. That, you know, if we have kids there that we know that are there unattended, I think we have an obligation to ensure their safety. You know, when I brought this up initially, city staff had tried to address the issue by simply adding a line in our library rules that says we will not be responsible for any children left unattended. But you can't in one breath say we allow children to be unattended at 8 years old, and then in the next breath say, but we don't have any responsibility for them. And I think Commissioner Riles would probably support me, just as personal injury lawyers, that you can't do that. You can't say that they could be here, but we're not responsible for them. Someone has to be responsible for an 8-year-old. An 8-year-old's just simply too young. What age is old enough to be left? But that's my thought. I know there's been some defensive posturing on the fact on behalf of the library, because I think they feel like maybe I'm here to try to change things, and I really would like to just work with the library and say, hey, how can we make it so that these kids are safe? The things that cause me particular concern are the fact of how many librarians do we have? Are the librarians equipped to handle the number of children that come in during the summer? You know, in a summer camp setting, in a daycare setting, in a school setting, there are certain elements and requirements. You have parental contacts, you have telephone numbers for parents in case of emergency, you have emergency lists such as anything from allergies a child might have, permission to provide emergency medical treatment to a child if they get hurt, permission to transport the child to a hospital. What happens if a fire alarm goes off, you know, while the library is in operation and you have 30 unattended children? Is there some sort of a plan to make sure that we don't have children just wandering around outside now should the fire alarm go off? These are just some things that I just want to make sure that we bring to staff's attention. I'm not comfortable with simply putting the wording in there that we're not responsible for unattended children. I think we got to do more than that, and I hope that we can at least discuss it and come to some resolution without taking that safe place away from the children. I understand that that's a huge concern, that maybe the children are safer even without these rules in place, here at our library than at home, but we are not their parents. And we can undertake certain things, but ultimately their parents need to be responsible for that safety unless we've got a plan that contemplates all of these things, you know, a check-in, a sign-in procedure, all that type of thing. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, staff?
Before I turn it over to our to our library director, just let me kind of the context, and Commissioner Paducci brought this to my attention, and my first reaction was similar. I was like, no, that can't be right. Children 8 years old can be unattended in a library, but I did some research that's exactly the case, and it's consistent with library programs and libraries across the country and across the state and within this county as well. So it really is looking at balancing that equitable access for the children at the library with public safety, and that can be a little bit of a difficult balance. And we looked at, in a broader sense, not beyond libraries, what other public spaces can children access and what kind of restrictions do we place on it or not. And so as an example, in our parks, a child can walk into a park, playground, unattended, and there is no age limit for parks. There are structured programs within our parks, including in our community centers, that then require the child to have a certain age, sign in, and they're paying for that service in many cases, or somebody's paying for that service. Palm Tram allows children as young as 7 to ride unaccompanied in the buses. So that's another example. You know, I thought of myself, actually. When I was a kid, we talked about memorable experiences when Gail was here. When I was a kid, one of the memorable experiences was me and my buddies doing a pickup game at Phipps Park of baseball and just grabbing a bat and a couple balls and some old gloves and playing a little pickup game. And I was probably 10 years old at the time. You know, another memory I had when I was a kid was my mom, God bless her soul, who just passed away, used to work at the Holiday Inn that was where the amphitheater is now. And during the summer, where I didn't have anywhere to go because we didn't have the resources and there wasn't all these programs that exist now, my mom would drop me off at the old library, which was where the fountains are now. And I'd sit there basically the whole day and go through the library, and there wasn't any programming at the time. And I probably was 8 or 9 years old during those days, and fed the pigeons most of the time. That's all there was to do in downtown back then, was feed the pigeons in front of the library. So, you know, I think we need to, and this is a different world, obviously, than 45 years ago when I was a kid or whatever, 40 years ago. But we do need to have that balance, I think, where that we have the access available for these kids at the same time being cognizant of the world we live in and public safety. And I think that the library tries to balance that out. And then I'll turn it over to Chris to kind of talk about what your staff does to ensure that safety.
Okay. Thanks very much. Chris Murray, Library Director. And I've been doing this stuff for about 41 years. I've worked at Columbia, South Carolina Public Library, Nashville Public Library, Charlotte Public Library, Broward Public Library, and it's pretty typical across the board that 8 years old is typically the age at which you can go to the library by yourself. I remember as a kid, I learned to ride a bike when I was 5 or 6. First place I went was a library, you know, because I had no money. I couldn't go to a store, you know, so I went to a library and I got a library card, and it was the only thing in my wallet. But I gotta say, our library is very safe. Our staff knows these kids. In fact, I can tell you some stories where I have two of my assistant director and my head of children's services have each had individual experience with kids who they've changed their lives. I mean, one of them came up to Lisa when she was first there and said, "I'm gonna kill you," you know? And Lisa said, "Oh, we don't kill people here in the library. Let's go get a book," you know? And this kid, his mother, they talked to her on the phone once. She never showed up once in the library. He moved to Riviera Beach. He moved all over the place. He kept finding his way back to the library. And he ended up acing the FCAT. He got the highest score in the FCAT, a kid who had, you know, no chance otherwise, basically. And we had another young woman who was going to not graduate because she wanted to play soccer instead. And Jennifer said, "No, you can't do that. You got to make a choice. You're going to take to school, not to soccer," you know. A couple of years later, she was graduating, and she had 2 tickets to the Coliseum, and she wanted Jen to go. And she goes, no, have your family go with you. And she goes, no, my family doesn't care, you know. I want you to come, you know. But, you know, the physicians have the Hippocratic Oath. Lawyers have legal ethics. The American Library Association has something called the Library Bill of Rights. It started in 1939. And one of the tenets of is a person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. The right to use a library includes free access to and unrestricted use of all the services, materials, and facilities the library has to offer. Every restriction on access to and use of library resources based solely on the chronological age, apparent maturity, educational level, literary skills, emancipatory or other legal status of users violates Article 5. This includes minors who do not have a parent or guardian available to sign up a library card or permission slip. Unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness should be able to obtain a library card regardless of library policies related to chronological age. And I also want to say that we have worked hard for the last 15 years. We've had a volunteer program. We have 40 volunteers go out to our foremost economically disadvantaged schools. It's called the Let's Read program. We train them how to read aloud to the kids. They do 3 10-week stints over the year. We actually have the foundation give us books to give to those kids, often the only book they have in their house. And those kids come down to the library because of that experience. That's their first connection with the library. And it really does change their life. And I just want to say that, you know, understand, you know, concern for kids, you know, being that young, being out in a library. But if we don't let them in the library, they're basically out on the street, you know, and that's not any safer. And, you know, if we were to prohibit unaccompanied children, you know, of a certain age to not use the library, we would be denying the benefits of the library to kids who have less affluent parents, you know. My parents they both worked. I would have never gone to the library to whatever age, you know, they would have made it up. And it was important for me to go to the library when I was a kid. I used to read, I didn't read my textbooks, but I read all these biographies of American people, these little orange books they had back in the day. And it's because of that I could pass the classes without reading the textbook, you know. You get a kid in the library, you get a kid reading, and it's a whole nother ballgame, you know. And certainly understand, I got to tell you, it's so much safer than the old library. The old library, my God, the kids could run down the hallway to go to the bathroom. They could run straight out the door, out into the street. You know. Here we have a children's area that is completely safe. It's got a heavy door. The young kids can't get out. It's too heavy. We have mirrors all over the place. If an adult walks into that library unaccompanied by a child, they're challenged by the library staff. Can we help you? What are you doing here? You know, so it's a very safe place. And you know, my assistant director Lisa was talking to a friend of hers, and she said, I want to feed the kids in the library. And her mother worked at the school lunch program. And so, yeah, we give out free lunches all summer long, summer break spot. Next year, Jeff Coons, the next county commissioner, called up, assistant deputy city administrator, and she put her on to Lisa. And so this county started doing it with a few branches. Now they're all doing it. They're doing it in Broward County. They're doing it in Miami-Dade. This is a big thing for kids to be able to, because kids don't want to go back to school during the summer to get a free lunch, you know, but they will come to the library, you know. So I understand the concern, you know, that 8 years old seems rather young, but I don't think there's a safer place for them in the city.
Let me add one thing, because one of the things I think that's really beginning to bear some fruit with the new leadership alignment is looking at things from a perspective that includes various departments. And so, you know, we meet the community services departments that are under me right now meet regularly, and we talk about these issues. And so recently we had Vickers House is now at the library regularly every week, 3 times a week, I believe, and that's bearing fruit. And we just had a discussion about, with these unaccompanied kids that are coming, especially in the summer, as you mentioned, how do we better connect them to some of the more supervised and organized programming that the parks department has. And so we're going to be working on those efforts as we get closer to summer, try to engage these parents. And some of these parents are just not engaged, period. But if we can get in touch with the parent and engage them, try to get them to understand that there are other programs available where they'll have that supervision, and they'll be at the parks. They can still visit the library, but we'll have more structure to their lives as well, and hopefully they're engaging their parents. So that's part of the effort, along with some of the safety things. I know are Mr. Key just recently has been going around different parts in the building, and PD and fire, and the library was one of the places that they looked at recently, and it was deemed to be very safe in terms of entrance and exit, especially for the kids.
What safeguards are in place to limit the interaction between, or to eliminate the interaction between children and adults?
As I say, in the children's department, if an adult comes in unaccompanied by a child, they will ask them what they're doing there. They want to know, why are you in the children's
So if a
department?
9-year-old wanders into the library, there's staff there to take them to the children's?
Yeah, I mean,
area?
if a staff member sees a young child on another floor, yeah, they'll escort them to the children's department. Yes.
Commissioner Marion?
Thank you, Mayor, only because I have to leave. I don't think I'll be able to finish this discussion. Definitely appreciate Commissioner Peduzzi and the spirit in which this item was brought. But I'm totally supportive of not only what's happening here in this library, but as you've articulated, really across the county, state, and country in terms of that. And I think we've all told our stories. I won't tell mine, but I was that eight-year-old kid that was in the library unaccompanied by an adult, not because that adult was working, because there was no adult. So I'm very supportive of us leaving it as such, but totally understand why Commissioner Peduzzi would bring this up. Thank you.
Commissioner Peduzzi?
Yeah, one thing that was mentioned was Vickers House. My understanding is that we're doing some work with Vickers House in our library. That causes me some concern also because of the fact that, you know, we have people now that have dependency issues that are coming into a place where we have unaccompanied children. You know, that's just one of the things. I mean, man, I think you got to be really careful saying our library is a very safe place. And you know, I've talked to our police officers, our rank and file officers, I've talked to our administrators, and they were all shocked to hear that this was something just as you were when it was first heard. And what some of the line police officers told me is that there's been many occasions where they've encouraged sexual predators, people that they knew were on the sexual predator list, to get out of the library because they're there. They're using the computers, you can't stop them from being there. And that was another thing you brought up. This right to use the library applies to sexual predators. Okay, so they are there. We know they're in the library. I don't think you can say a statement such as our library is very safe when you know there's sexual predators in that library at the same time as unaccompanied children. I think it's an irresponsible thing to say. Now, I know that you're trying to do good, and I know that libraries across the nation are doing this stuff. I think there's some libraries, though, that do have some more restrictions than we have. My understanding is Palm Beach County, the age is a little older.
No, it's 8 at Palm Beach County.
I had heard it was 9 from their director.
I have the documentation
All
right
right,
here. if you'd like to
all right,
see it.
listen.
Yeah, I don't want to get into an argument, but I just...
What is it that you want us to do?
I'm not asking you to do anything. I just want to make sure if they're telling me these children are safe, fine. But I'll be the first commissioner if something happens to ask some very difficult questions.
Well, I think the one thing we look at is what is the alternative. So the alternatives could be we put more funding into more supervised type programs. That would be one alternative. The other alternative would be to simply not allow them in, which then places them on the street. A lot of these kids don't have supervision after school, so they're alone. So they're with the sexual predators now on the streets, which is even worse. So I want to make a distinction between unaccompanied and unobserved. They are observed. Our staff is observing the children and making sure that, you know, if they're approached by an adult that's clearly not their parent, then they're being questioned. So there is a distinction between unaccompanied and unobserved. They are being observed. But I understand your point. There's no, you know.
Mayor, if I want to follow up, the staffing at the library, though, is different than staffing at a daycare or a summer camp facility where there's a certain number of children and a certain number of adults. Our library, I have a feeling, doesn't meet that staffing requirement.
I don't know what that staffing requirement is, and this may not reassure you, but in the 41 years I've been working in public libraries, in all these public libraries, there's never been an incident along the lines that you're concerned about, you know.
I hope it stays that way.
Me too. I do too. I mean, and we do work hard for that. If we have a person in mind, our staff looks at them online, sees if they got a record, sees if they're a sexual predator, and they make sure every time he's in the building, they keep him away from the kids. You know, we are vigilant on that stuff.
Commissioner Rouse?
I think, I think, Commissioner, your heart's in the right place, and given what we do, it does make us more jaded. But I see the young people crossing 2 railroad tracks to come to the library to stay there all day because they have nowhere else to go. And, you know, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Perhaps, you know, maybe you and the library folks can come up with some additional safeguards that would make you feel more comfortable. But given the alternative of not providing the service that the library does and how it impacts lives so significantly, I do understand your concern, but I don't know of a remedy at this point that would not negatively impact a population of people who sorely need the services that the library provides.
And if I can just speak up for my staff, this is the best staff I've ever worked with in all the years I've been doing this. We got a grant 8, 9 years ago from the Jim Moran Foundation to start an after-school homework center, K to 5. And usually they only fund for a year or two. They funded us for 5 or 6 years, and they said, what happens when they become teenagers? Well, we got nothing. So they funded a teen homework center, you know. The staff does such a good job that outside funders look at them and they say, this is done well, you know.
Okay.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Shaw.
Thank you. Excuse me. I certainly understand that safety is priority here. And Commissioner Peduzzi, I know the library has keenly come into focus, but we have what I consider the library, the public realm, like any other park, like any other place in the city, where you're going to have interactions between groups of people that typically may not happen. So I think safety, to me, is the thing that I hear all this conversation. Like, if there's an ask from me, it's how can we do better at safety? Because at the end of the day, the argument comes down to equity, and I am by no means prepared to allow a population of people that are using the library as a place, as a safe haven, to not have that safe haven. I was very fortunate to have 2 parents, one of which could stay home with me. Not everyone is that fortunate, and I'm not willing to put in place a policy that would exclude those that weren't as fortunate. So I guess my ask would be, you know, to Mr. Fonda's point, what else can we do? You know, if there are places where we can be better supportive, you know, let's not be exclusionary, let's be inclusionary. Let's find out a better way that we can create some safeguards. So that I would certainly be supportive of creating a better safe place, putting in place more safeguards. If that included dedicating funding, certainly doing that. But I am supportive of the policy that's currently in place with the age.
Yes,
Briefly.
please.
The library, though, is a unique place because of the fact that you can't ban sexual predators and the like from being there. In a park, a sexual predator can't come within a certain number of feet of a child. I mean, it's written into law. At a library, they can. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. So all I would ask, and you're correct, I should at least ask, is that we do everything possible to, you know, to make sure that we have the adequate staffing with the children that are there. And, you know, if we can come up with some sort of an accountability system or some sort of system that the fire alarm goes off, that we know where the people are going to be, you know, meeting, that everyone, staff knows that. And you may already have that in place. I don't know. But if you could just do those things and do the best we can with what we have.
And we'll be happy to. And I just want to mention one more thing. There was a study in the 60s. Children from less affluent homes, by the time they're 3 years old, more affluent children have 30 million more words, vocabulary words, than those other kids. Those are the kids we need to get into the library. You know, they are most in need of the resources.
So we will look at ways that we can beef up the safety of the kids, for sure.
I
Get back on that. We'll report that back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.